Chris is a sophomore in the Carroll School of Management, concentrating in accounting. He grew up 10 minutes away from BC's campus in Belmont, Massachusetts. Ironically, Chris signed up to give a BC talk about ADHD while he was procrastinating studying for a managerial accounting exam. Without further ado, here's Chris.
Can you hear me? Okay, good. I'm a runner, and a rower, and a photographer, and a rock climber, and a hiker, and a biker, and a skier, photographer, an artist, writer, sculptor, actor, camp counselor, an intern, an ice cream scooper, a lawyer, a cat sitter, a tennis player, and in 2010, I was elected to be the captain of my middle school B team basketball team. Who am I, you might be wondering? My name is Christopher Keegan, and I have ADHD. ADHD stands for Attention Deficit / Hyperactivity Disorder, and it's very similar to ADD, except ADHD includes the diagnosis of hyperactivity. Now, there are two troubling things about this diagnosis to me, more specifically in terms of the use of the D words, deficit and disorder. Now, if attention was a physical currency, then yes, I would say I have a deficit, and in fact, I would go so far as to say that I'm impoverished. But unfortunately, attention isn't something that can be collected like coins. It's not a physical currency. A deficit is something by which something is too small, which implies that there are a certain amount of attentions that I need to possess in order to overcome my deficit. But how many attentions is enough? How many attentions do I need to be middle of the pack at Boston College? How many attentions would I need to do a dissertation at Columbia University? I've been searching for a number for 20 years, and I've yet to find anything. And if anyone has any information, find me after, and we'll have a little chat. But the one thing that attention and money do have in common is that both have become measures of defining our own personal self-worth. In our society, attention is notice taken of someone or something. But what that really means is that in our rigidly industrial society, is that the attention is simply the ability to focus on a specific task. And there's a reason why we say pay attention when we talk about focus, because concentrating on something requires one to give up a significant amount of their own mental resources in order to fully dedicate themselves to said task. And just like someone has to pay money to invest in the stock market. The more money you invest, the more stocks you can buy. And the more stocks you buy, the higher yield you'll have. Bear with me, sorry, I'm in CSOM. Most people can function in the society that we've created, and nearly everyone can afford to spend their attention evenly throughout the day, from 9 to 5, focusing on the task at hand, and at the end of the day, still have a little bit of attention left over when all the work is done. And like every society, there are winners and losers, and we see those who are rich in attention every single day. They're on magazine covers, they're on TV, they're the prize winners, they're the experts, and they're the ones that we're supposed to want to be. But those who don't have as much attention, the ones who would be below the poverty line, the ones with the deficits, well, we don't see them too much. I mean, why would we want to anyways? They're lazy, they're stupid, they're unmotivated, and they just don't get it. And in the society that we've created, anyone who doesn't fit in the mold is tossed aside. A reject on the assembly line of higher education, higher education, and employment. And if you can't stay on task for 5 45-minute blocks a day, forget it. You're going nowhere. You're going to sit with the rest of the rejects in a special classroom because there's just no place for you in regular society. At least that's how it feels to someone with ADHD. My other problem with the diagnosis is the use of the word disorder, because human beings weren't designed for the lives that we live today. Before we developed the agrarian society that became the basis for the modern world, we were hunter-gatherers. And humans evolved for millions of years in a Paleolithic environment. And this means that we were meant to search for food, and we evolved to detect the stimuli that could mean a potential meal and a potential predator. And this response is called involuntary attention. Sudden movements, bright colors, loud noises, strange odors, anything that breaks up the consistency of the environment you're in and triggers an automatic response of redirected attention is an example of involuntary attention. And it's an essential part of our human nature, and without it, we wouldn't be able to survive. However, this involuntary response is cranked up for people like me, and it doesn't take a loud noise, it doesn't take a bright light, it doesn't take a sudden movement, because it could be any light, it could be any noise, and it could be any movement. And most people don't give this reaction a second thought, but involuntary attention rules the lives of people with ADHD. People with ADHD are far more reactive to the stimuli that trigger this involuntary attention, and therefore it's no wonder that I have trouble paying attention in the first place. When most people are using their concentration for one task, I've already used the little attention that I have on things that I can't help but focus on, wearing out my ability to summon the voluntary attention I need for the thing that I need to focus on. Now, voluntary attention is the sort of attention that we use to focus on long, mundane, but important tasks. And it's actually what allowed our society to develop into the agrarian society that became the basis for the modern world. And the traits that make a successful agricultural society are very different from those that make a successful hunter-gatherer society. Growing crops, maintaining farmland, all require vast amounts of repeated concentration and focus. And those with the highest capacity for this voluntary attention were best suited for this lifestyle. And as the world developed around this agricultural society, it developed around these traits as well. Agrarian societies eventually gave way to industrial societies. And in these industrial societies, the capacity for voluntary attention became even more critical. People began to work in factories and on assembly lines, and the ideal employee could churn out thousands and thousands and thousands of the same products within a matter of hours. However, researchers believe that agrarian societies have only really existed for about 10,000 years. And the highly industrial society that we live in is generally agreed to have started in Britain around in the 18th century. However, it's estimated that humans existed in the Paleolithic state, that is, as hunter-gatherer societies, for nearly 2.6 million years. And how is it that our society has discredited the traits that we've evolved to survive over 2.6 million years for the traits that have only been relevant for the past 10,000? And beyond that, the incredible amounts of focus and the superhuman amounts of concentration required for our industrial society have only existed for 300 years. Human beings don't evolve over 300 years, and each one of us has a little bit of that hunter-gatherer in them. However, it's no wonder why our society prizes a sort of willed, extended attention. The need for regimented attention is ingrained into our children from the day that they start school. American children are subject to a form of assembly line education in which every 50 minutes they're dipped into one subject and another and another and another and another, and this process goes from kindergarten until high school graduation. And along the way, there are quality control tests, quality control inspectors, in the form of standardized testing to ensure that every student has absorbed the formula, and then if the grades are satisfactory at the end of the line, they'll be stamped with approval, given a diploma, and sent on their way. But students with ADHD don't work like this, and yet they must go through the process anyways. And if they do make it through all the way through the production line, and they get stamped with the approval, and they receive the diploma, there's still the marks and the scars left by the failure and the rejection from years of not fitting the mold. And to this day, I have trouble accepting my own accomplishments. And even though I've overcome so much to get where I am, I still have a nagging feeling that I didn't earn it, that I don't deserve what I've achieved because I'm not as good as the other students. And if you talk to another student with ADHD, the chances are they'll have something very similar to say. If you look at Russell Barkley's statistics on ADHD, they're very telling and very, very troubling. 25% of people with ADHD are likely to develop depression coupled with low self-esteem over their lives. And another 33% have some form of anxiety disorder, and yet another 25% are at risk of substance abuse over their lives. But it's not hard to see why, though. The majority of ADHD students experience difficulty with academic performance throughout their entire lives, and this takes a toll. So much of a toll that up to 36% of students with ADHD drop out of high school. And it's often just a matter of frustration of being forced to function in an environment that you aren't adapted to. And this is a staggering statistic considering that 11% of children between the ages of 4 and 17 have been diagnosed with ADHD. Lazy, stupid, unmotivated. These are all adjectives that follow ADHD students throughout their entire lives, and they eventually stick. However, the difference between ADHD students is not a lack of capacity, but rather a difference in cognition. But what can we do to save our ADHD kids? In our rigid education system, conformity is king, and the path to being like the others is through medication. Drugs like Adderall, Ritalin, Concerta, and others are often the first step in a daily ritual for kids as young as 4 years old, just looking to be like the rest of the school. For most ADHD students, life is an endless cycle of pills, and these drugs don't cure ADHD. Rather, they treat the symptoms and they mask the issue at hand. Kids are often encouraged to shop around, to find the drug that works the best, but has the least amount of side effects. And once these kids find the medication, it's often what they have to rely on to perform in school. Personally, I took Concerta starting my junior year of high school, and when I started to take it, I didn't really like it. I didn't shop around, and I don't think I found the right drug for me. I took what I was prescribed, and then I never went back to refill my prescription. And I made it through my senior year of high school, I made it through my college application process, and I enrolled in Boston College all without the help of medication. So I didn't think I needed the medication. But on a deeper level, I think I realized that taking the medication meant that I had to accept my own ADHD. I was on the men's rowing team when I came in my freshman year, and I learned a lot from the experience. And in rowing, it's a sport dependent upon the highly synchronized efforts of everyone together. And a boat is only as strong as the weakest link. It's a sport that thrives on self-accountability, dedication, and concentration. And I thought that rowing would provide structure to my days, and I thought that it would provide me with a schedule that I'd be able to stick with. But I wasn't any more productive. And the late nights of studying didn't stop. And waking up at 5:30 a.m. 6 days a week began to take its toll. I could barely muster the ability to pay attention in any of my classes, and I was exhausted, and I was doing terribly in school. And I was nowhere near my potential, and I knew it. My self-confidence began to waver, and I fell into a deep depression. And that spring, I found that I was gradually drifting away from the friends that I'd become so close with in the beginning of the year. And that only exacerbated the problem. I felt like I didn't know who I was anymore, and I felt like I didn't know what I was going for or where I was going. And that spring, when grades were released, I ended up getting 2 C's, and I knew that something had to change. And so over the summer, I came to the decision that I had to let go of crew and that I needed to start getting the help that I needed. I began taking the Concerta again, and I finally utilized my extra time at the Connors Family Learning Center, and it made an incredible difference. My GPA went up by 0.7, and I felt like I was finally performing close to my potential. For the first time, I was open about my ADHD, and I accepted it. And I realized that it was a part of who I am, and that the prescriptions were actually there to help. And in the end, I was proud of what I was able to accomplish. But what's always been interesting to me is the way that people react when I tell them they have ADHD. Most people are very accepting. In fact, most people don't even realize that I have ADHD. The issue comes when I tell people about my accommodations. And that's where things get interesting. Because people learn that I take my medications, and people learn that I get extra time. And what happens is a very strange phenomenon. As people began to take their academics more seriously, and as we progressed and people became more mature, when they would learn that I would take medication, I would learn that I would have to brace myself for the inevitable, can I have one? People saw the things that I took in order to get to the level that they were at and wanted to abuse them for themselves. There was a sense of jealousy with my extra time, a sense of jealousy with the ability of my medications, and people thought I had an advantage. It almost seemed like there was a sentiment that I was the privileged one, that I was the privileged one for having all these accommodations, and that I was the privileged one for having ADHD. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. Because for most kids with ADHD, accommodations are what give us the ability to have a glimpse into what it's like to be on the same playing field as everyone else. And that's why accommodations exist. To give people the opportunity to perform at their potential and to equal the playing field. And if there was no need for accommodations, then they wouldn't exist. But the reality is that this privilege that I have for having ADHD, and the advantages that I have with my accommodations, only last until graduation. There's no extra time in the real world, and once we leave the heights, the true nature of what was seen as my advantage emerges. Without accommodations, ADHD students have to build their own ladders to reach the same playing field as everyone else. There's no extra time in the real world, and we have to work twice as hard in a world systemically designed to marginalize people with attention deficiencies. But the expectations are exactly the same. The only difference is that those with ADHD have to work twice as hard to fit time and a half into time. Now, I want to finish with a comic. It's a comic, it's a Calvin and Hobbes comic, and I'm sure that many of you are familiar with Calvin and Hobbes. And the particular comic that I'm going to show you is one that I saw on the internet a few years ago. It's labeled as what was supposed to be the final comic in the Calvin and Hobbes series. And when I saw it for the first time, I cried. And to this day, when I see it, tears well up in my eyes because of how close it hits to home for an accurate description of ADHD. But the reality is that this is a fake comic. This comic was never intended to be the final comic of the Calvin and Hobbes series. This comic was never even drawn by Bill Watterson. This is the final comic that was published on December 31st, 1995, 4 months before my birthday. ADHD is not a life sentence. I have an entire world ahead of me, and I don't want to stop exploring. My name is Christopher Keegan, and I'm a runner, I'm a rower, I'm a photographer, and I'm so many different things, and I have ADHD. Thank you.